Awesome. Welcome everybody to day 2. I hope everybody had a great time with all of the content yesterday and the party. It looked like a lot of good times were had. And thank you everybody on the live stream who was joining us as well. Hopefully we can have you in person at a future event. So I'm super excited today. We're going to have a few guest speakers join us and talk about their journey. You know, I think as a bit of a pattern, what we've seen is there's this almost classic progression, right, with the many users and customers we work with on their journey to cloud. And the patterns are in some sense almost so common that we've sort of created this framework where we talk about the 3 phases of cloud adoption. What we tend to see is in phase 1, it's a relatively ad hoc approach. Organizations start working with the cloud, they enable their application teams to pick up various tools, maybe log in directly to the console, start provisioning and deploying applications. And it's almost this very ad hoc approach to cloud. Different teams, different process, different tools. And almost invariably what we find is somewhere along that journey, organizations run into a set of challenges, right? Either you have this tool sprawl that creates a set of security issues, right? You have people provisioning things in an insecure way. You have things that aren't being kept up to date. You don't have firewall rules that are tightly controlled. You end up with compliance issues, right? Teams try to say, okay, this environment needs to be PCI compliant. How do I do that when I have 50 different teams doing it in 50 different ways? Or you end up with cost issues, right? And so what we often find is somewhere along the way, organizations realize this doesn't work. We can't have it be totally ad hoc and kind of be Wild West. And this often leads then to the formation of a central team, right? Whether it's a platform team, a cloud center of excellence, different organizations will call it different things. But this central group provides a more consistent approach in terms of tooling, process, standards to enable the application teams while thinking about some of those day 2 challenges around security, compliance, cost. Oftentimes this starts with cloud, and the platform teams are responsible for delivering those services for the cloud environment. And then in the most mature organizations, we see that then go beyond cloud to how we think about maybe retail stores or how we think about private data centers or edge campuses. And that ends up being kind of phase 3, maybe the most mature sort of at-scale deployments of cloud. So to maybe share some of these stories and make it a little bit more real, we have 2 guests joining us today to talk through their journey through their cloud programs. And so I'm super excited to welcome up first Evan Wood from the Home Depot to share their story. Welcome.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much. So I think we have obviously we're in San Francisco in the US. I think most people in the States are probably familiar with the Home Depot, but not everybody. We have a lot of international audience. I think it's easy enough for me to say that you guys are one of the biggest retailers in the United States with over 2,000 stores. You guys are literally everywhere. If you drive in any direction, you will find a Home Depot. But maybe you could start us off and share a little bit more about your role and what you do at the Home Depot.
Absolutely. So I'm Evan Wood, Director of Cloud Engineering at the Home Depot. And I lead a team of about 30 people, a mix of skills, cloud engineering, software engineering, cloud FinOps recently we've added. And our team is responsible for managing our cloud management platform, which is Enterprise Terraform, Terraform Enterprise, and Enterprise Vault. Team's very focused on self-service, is one of the key focal points. Size of the environment, we've got about 1,000 GCP projects. We support over 3,000 developers. And we focus on day 0 and day 1 efforts. That's primarily onboarding and orientation, but we're also responsible for putting a lot of the controls, financial, operational, and cyber into place for the cloud.
That's really helpful. I guess as you think about the role of technology for the Home Depot, you guys have gone through a number of transformations. Certainly over COVID, it was a huge shift to e-commerce. Yep. I know there's been a big focus on changing the in-store experience.
Right.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of those bigger technology transformations that you guys are going through as an organization.
Absolutely. And the story in this space is called interconnected retail. And what we mean by that is making it easy for our customers to connect to us when they want to, where they want to, and doing it well, right? So to do that we built multiple layers. So at the bottom layer, we built a network ring nationwide that directly connects our stores, cloud, and data centers. And then this allows us, it's a tremendous platform, allows us to use mesh, data migrations, not having to worry about going over the internet. Something we did recently in stores was roll out Wi-Fi 6 across the chain. And this helps a lot in our customers' ability to connect to us. And then on top of that, we just rolled out 100,000 devices to our store associates. Uses the Wi-Fi 6. And that device, along with custom software we've written, really helps our store associates, even new ones, be able to help our customers because they've got the information on the phone. One of the apps that we just rolled out called Sidekick, and that application is primarily a tasking engine that we use machine learning behind the scenes to improve the tasking priority. But it's also really helped out with restocks. And what we find is that we've got SKUs missing on a shelf. A lot of times, the backup inventory is in the store, up in an overhead bin. So the Sidekick app can direct the store associate in a prioritized task to restock that. And customers are happy, they get what they want, and we get to sell a little bit more. So that's been a huge influence.
So it sounds like all of these are pretty large technology transformations, but you can kind of draw almost a straight line between the impact it has to customer experience and ultimately sort of the revenue and bottom line of the organization. My sense is that all of this is ultimately being delivered through cloud set of services, right?
That's correct. And so a lot of the most of the APIs that back this are in cloud. Absolutely, yeah.
And so your team is ultimately providing sort of that central cloud platform. Maybe share a little bit about, what was the journey for HashiCorp tools being involved with, the Home Depot and the platform organization? Sure.
We started experimenting in cloud about 2015. Got serious about 2016. One of the first things we did with HashiCorp was with open source Vault. We rolled that out for our e-commerce platform. Those set of clusters are still in production today. They support 1,000 applications, and we're starting to talk to that team about migrating to Enterprise Vault. About 2018, we started seeing pretty wide adoption of Terraform open source across multiple teams in Home Depot. We did some really cool stuff, and it really improved individuals' teams' ability to manage their cloud infrastructure. We did see a certain amount of fragmentation with that, meaning the cool solution in Team 1 didn't necessarily make it to Team 2. And so about 2019, my team was formed, and in 2020, one of the first things we did was roll out Terraform Enterprise. Yep. And that really helped us standardize. When we got into Terraform Enterprise and we looked at all the resources we might have to import, we realized we had to do some prioritization. Right. And compliance helped us with a little prioritization, and we firewalls and IAM. So instead of trying to pull everything in, and we had some teams that had terraformed everything, we kind of went horizontally and said, we're going to make sure that firewalls are covered across the board, right, and there's not a way to change firewall rules unless you're coming through the platform. Did the same thing with IAM. 2022, we started rolling out Enterprise Vault. We're still in the middle of that migration. And in parallel, a timeline we had is self-service. So we're about on our 3rd generation of portal software, so that trying to make it as easy as possible for developers to consume cloud.
And so maybe it was sort of implicit in there, but it may be helpful for the audience, which is you sort of started cloud 2015-16. Developers had sort of an ad hoc approach, sounds like, for a few years. Right. And then the platform team wasn't created till 2019. What was the catalyst that drove the creation of that team? Yeah, well, it was compliance, right? And so leadership recognized that we needed to get some things cleaned up, and instead of doing large cleanup efforts over and over, get a proper workflow in place so that we could automate it and ensure that we're taking care of the needs from a compliance perspective. One of the things we recognized, though, is that we wanted to have a great developer experience, right? It wasn't good enough just to put automation people were forced to use, so we adopted a product mindset. And by that, I mean we hired a product manager and UX, but we really want to focus on what's right for the customer. So our product team makes sure that we understand our customers, which are our developers, and that we prioritize features. We also recognized that we had 2 primary personas. Yep. One being the developer, who wants a great driving experience with their infrastructure.
And the second is SRE, and they want a more fine-grained control. Yeah.
That makes sense. So, I think the role of the platform team sounds pretty clear, right? It's about enabling the developers to be successful and providing them sort of a simple onboarding path. How do you think about measuring the success of that? What are the sort of metrics you look at? How do you think about what good looks like?
Yeah. First, proud to say we're clean and green on compliance. So that was the first check. The second is actual security. So being able to manage the life cycles of our keys and secrets, being able to use policies code, which has been a huge change to our approach, where we can stop bad things from happening before they get started. And so that was a huge one. Also, standardization has driven lots of efficiencies in our cloud governance model and how we operate the cloud governance model, meaning we get our entire platform certified by our cyber team, and then application teams can just focus on the security review. In their security reviews, they just have to focus on their code and their data.
Right. And then do you think about a metric like what's that time to bringing a service to market? Do you look at the sort of that end-to-end developer time?
Absolutely. So I think that's hard to measure, and we've got a lot of tools in there measuring that. But one of the biggest things is we know if we could reduce or remove a step for a developer to get infrastructure they need to run their code, we're saving them time, and that time can go back to writing the code for our customer experience.
Right. No, that's huge. So as you guys think about sort of like what's next for the Home Depot, particularly on sort of like the journey you've been on with HashiCorp, curious if you could share a little bit more.
Sure. So we're kind of taking the learnings we've had to this point and really working on a fully managed experience for our developers. So we're doing that. From an announcement yesterday, really excited to dive into the testing suite in Terraform, especially the Gen AI.
Right. And then I'm interested because I know you talked about sort of the sort of almost third generation developer portal you're on. Maybe share just a little bit more as to how you think about almost that internal developer portal experience at Home Depot and what you guys are trying to achieve in terms of that developer workflow.
Sure. Well, outside, so if a team needs routes for mesh, or they need a cluster, or they need a namespace, it turns out that a whole bunch of the questions we need to ask them for compliance are the same, right? So we've been able to really get to a low code form generation so that teams can come in and easily add a form to the portal to kind of get the resource they need. What we're focused on now is ongoing configuration. That's a much tougher problem to solve, and so that's where we're spending a lot of our time now.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that. Well, Evan, thank you so much for sharing and spending this time to share the Home Depot's journey. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to working with you guys and on your journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much to Evan for sharing his journey with the Home Depot. I think this is what's super interesting for us is we get to work with organizations like Home Depot, and these are often long journeys, right? As we heard, it went from 2015, 16 to where it started to now we're many years into that, and still getting to talk about where is this evolving, where is this going, and always new challenges. So I want to shift gears a little bit to a totally different industry, right, and talk about gaming. Obviously, a very different set of challenges there. Now we're talking low latency, millions of players, always online. So a completely different problem space, but also going through a transformation. So I'm excited to welcome George Hamilton from Unity to talk through the cloud journey that they've been on. George, you want to join me on stage? Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So I think might be helpful almost to give a little bit of background on Unity, because I think you guys are almost silently behind the scenes powering so much of the games that we have on our mobile phones and desktops and systems, but maybe a lot of customers don't directly interface with you. So maybe start us off, give us a quick introduction to yourself and a quick introduction to Unity.
So I'm George. I'm from Austin. I work at Unity Technologies since 2020. I work on the platform team, which is part of our production reliability engineering group. We oversee the production of software. At Unity, we have a product called Unity. It is a real-time 3D engine and editor, mostly used for making interactive 3D experiences, games. That's not all we do, but it's a large part of it. Unity is made to create, I think, something like 80% of AA down to indie titles. So many of you probably have a Unity game on your phone right now.
Or multiple.
Or multiple, it's possible. We also have a number of services that complement the editor that our studios can use to enhance their game experiences. Probably at the forefront of that is multiplay. So we have a lot of games running on multiplay for matchmaking and for game server purposes. Apex Legends is one such game. Rocket League uses some of our stuff. We also have a service called Vvox, which is voice chat, and with some safety stuff on top of that. Like Apex again uses Vvox, and I think League of Legends also. So we have a number of folks using our services as well at scale. We also have Unity Cloud Build for doing CI/CD for games, so that you can easily build for many targets, such as PS5, PC, Switch, Android, iOS. So and that's just scratching the surface.
That's a wide variety of services. Maybe just quickly, how many people roughly are in the development organization delivering these set of cloud services?
I think at last count, we had somewhere between 1,800 and 2,000. I haven't got the org chart always in the back of my head, but
it's a large team delivering a wide set of services.
Big group, and you can't know everybody's name.
So, I'm curious, maybe you can share a little bit about the history of HashiCorp at Unity. And obviously, you guys deliver a huge number of cloud services, been on the cloud journey for a while now. Maybe just give us a little bit of a sense of what was the history of HashiCorp with Unity.
Well, so I'm a bit of a latecomer. So I joined Unity, as I said, in 2020. We started our cloud journey, I want to say, somewhere in the 2014, 15, 16 range, targeting AWS. And started to incorporate Terraform and Vault. Vault definitely came first. Vault's been around for a long time. But we started using Terraform, I want to say, around 2016, 17 range to build our AWS environments. And we started doing it in a pretty, I think, common way that a lot of people start to tiptoe into Terraform. We started running it manually.
And ad hoc all over the place.
Ad hoc all over the place. Guys running it on their laptops, saying, hey, hold the phone, don't do anything. Terraform is doing stuff. And I'm sure there are many people here who had that experience early on, found that it doesn't scale. And so we, in 2018, moved to Terraform Enterprise and really started getting into our Terraform ecosystem in earnest.
Got it. And then maybe just play forward sort of what's the evolution been from 2018 now in terms of sort of Terraform usage throughout the organization.
For sure. So we, around that time, we were incorporating a new public cloud. We were jumping to the Google Cloud Platform. And when you start fresh in such a way, you get a chance to kind of reinvent your wheels a little bit and kind of come up with some new processes that are a little bit more modern. And that's when we started to, we engaged with Terraform Enterprise. We started to do our infrastructure more in a GitOps flow. So changes go into Git first and then come in as a merge request, because we were on GitLab at the time, and gets reviewed and merged in, and everything is tracked, everything is managed according to code as opposed to somebody doing something on their laptop. And everybody's looking at the same set of changes at all times. So we ran that way for quite a while. Our Terraform Enterprise environment got a little stale, and we got a little tired of managing it. And so we started to explore maybe jumping to Terraform Cloud. And we made that decision and migrated 800 plus workspaces from TFE to TFC. And that's where we live now. And we now have, I think, over 1,100 workspaces, and it keeps growing. And we have it pretty much self-service, so that identity is managed. People can go and add themselves to their groups, get into their workspaces, and pretty much all that happens without us having to do anything.
That's great to hear. And so I think very clear on kind of the Terraform story and sort of that arc of sort of almost starting ad hoc, sort of realizing the challenge of that, moving towards more of a central approach with TFE, and kind of migrating to TFC over time. You mentioned that sort of Vault's been in the environment since a time before time. Maybe share a little bit about how Vault actually gets used in the Unity environment as well.
Right. So, like the City of London, the system of Vault has retained its ancient privileges by sea and by land in our company. So, it is very, very deep in the foundation of what we do at Unity. It holds anything that we would hate to see in clear text, essentially. So, we use it for build secrets, for runtime secrets, for secrets used by humans. So, like if you have if you're sharing an account for some service, there's a good chance that we've got that in Vault and rotated and such. We use Vault to perform CA duties, so we generate certificates for our Prometheus stack using Vault. And any opportunity that we have to lean on Vault, we do, because it's rock solid. Everybody knows it. It's got a ton of stuff in it. It's got a ton of documentation and infrastructure investment from our side, and we just know that it's going to be there.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I know one of the big drivers for a lot of these things, like moving to sort of central Terraform as a service and Vault as a service, was developer productivity. I guess I'm curious, maybe you can speak a little bit more of how have you seen that sort of evolve as you go towards a standardized approach and the impact that's had on the developer productivity?
Sure. So we strive to pave a golden road for our teams and for our developers through our Terraform ecosystem and everything else that we do. But we've invested heavily in our set of modules that spin up everything from clusters to node pools to Azure subscriptions, budgets, like anything. If it has, if it exists in a provider, we're going to try to use Terraform to get at it. And this has led us to the point where we can launch really cool new services to market using really cool new services from our providers in a matter of weeks. We launched a chat AI product called Muse, which is basically like ChatGPT for the Unity editor. And
maybe what was that? What was that sort of time to market from sort of idea conception to being able to actually deliver that capability?
The requirements started rumbling about 3 to 4 weeks, I think, before we went live with the service. So our CTO started going, "Hey, what's this OpenAI business? How can we get in on that?" And then we had the Muse Alpha out, I think, 3 to 4 weeks later.
That's huge.
And we would not have been able to do it if we hadn't had all of that foundation built over those 5 years, 6 years in our Terraform ecosystem.
And is that something you guys look at measuring in terms of sort of like what that time to market is as you think about, or sort of that delivery process for developers?
We have a metric that we look at called time to first commit, which basically is how long does it take for a developer to get their code from not existing to in production serving customers. And so everything we do generally is in service of reducing that metric so that people can get their ideas to market as fast as they can. And pretty much all of them need some kind of cloud service in order to get it done. And so, our job is done when we hear nothing and you launch.
Right.
And it's just going. So, whenever we review like how it is we're doing, well, a lot of the time we look at also like our support Slack channel and see, where are the pain points, and usually that leads us to an improvement with the Terraform module, improvement with the provider, maybe an upgrade of a provider where we didn't realize there was a new feature available, and lately maybe an upgrade to Terraform itself because there have been so many new improvements coming into core.
And if I remember correctly, you guys actually have some custom providers you've built to actually help do some automation.
That's right.
Sort of, what's the role of some of those custom providers?
Well, we have one called Orion, which is based on the Open API provider. There's a service that we wrote in-house that essentially performs the deployment of network infrastructure, so VPCs, subnets, IP allocation, all those things that are kind of important to get right the first time. So we lean on that very heavily. That's a big part of why we're able to go to market so quickly, because the network picture is more or less solved by Orion. Yeah.
That just gets packaged in as part of Terraform modules, so developers don't even have to really think about it.
Right. Well, we host it in the registry, and so we write a little bit of documentation on how to pull it out of the registry and what versions to use, and it pretty much handles itself.
That's awesome. So as you guys think about sort of like what's next for the infrastructure evolution for Unity and how you guys leverage some of the HashiCorp technology, curious what's sort of on your roadmap, what's exciting to you?
Well, we're very hype about testing. The new testing stuff is, I don't know how many people in this room have done, testing in TerraTest, where you had to write Go code in order to really thoroughly test your modules and your workspaces and such. So having something that looks like Terraform be able to test Terraform is a game changer, and it's going to, I think, really lead to proliferation among our teams in terms of like the modules they write themselves and the confidence they have in the quality of those modules.
That's awesome.
And we're also pretty excited about the stacks feature. I really need to get down and dirty with like what's that going to do for us, but I know that just from your presentation yesterday that it maps very closely to how it is that we organize our environments. So I anticipate we will be benefiting from that feature too. And everything else that seems to come down the line, it's just like every time we have a problem, there's a feature to solve it within a couple of months or even sooner. So there's
the wiretap we put in your office.
That's probably I was wondering what that blinking light was.
If you're wondering why we opened the firewall ports, that was awesome. Well, George, thank you so much for coming and sharing the journey Unity's been on. I think this has been tremendously helpful for people to just get a better sense of what does this look like over time, what's the evolution of these things, and so thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Awesome. Well, a huge thank you to both of our guests, Evan and George from Home Depot and Unity. I think hopefully what both of these stories illustrate is I know many of the folks in this room are at different points on their cloud journey. Some people are, early days, just getting started, and other people are 5, 6, 7, 8 years in, like these organizations. But I hope what this demonstrates is the pattern that we see across all these organizations is that need to start from what ends up being almost an ad hoc approach. You kind of heard it in both these organizations, evolves over time to a bit more of a central platform type approach. And that's what then drives sort of an efficient at-scale delivery that scales to thousands of developers and many hundreds of services in a multi-cloud environment. So now I want to shift gears a little bit, and rather than sort of talk about, in some sense, the past trends we've seen, looking forward a little bit, right? We obviously spend a lot of time with our users, a lot of times with our customers, and so we kind of get to see a bunch of these trends as they're emerging, and obviously those then impact how we think about the product investments at HashiCorp. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about a handful of trends we see, and I think the impact we see them having. The first one of these is, I think, the emergence of edge, right? We've sort of talked about it in many ways. I think if you ask 5 people what edge means, you're going to get 6 different answers. I think it can mean a broad range of things, right? What we heard from Evan, for example, was, hey, we're deploying 100,000 devices in store, that those are impacting how our associates actually work day to day. It's changing their workflow. It's changing the order in which we're restocking inventory. Each store, each one of those 2,000 plus stores is also a data center. It's running local software. It's changing the customer experience. It's routing people to where they can find an item. So to us, that's also edge, right? Whether it's the device in someone's hand, whether it's the retail store, whether it's a manufacturing plant, whether it's a car on the road, all of those are, I think, changing the nature of how we have to think about orchestration, right? It's one thing to deploy an app to one data center. It's a different thing now when I have to think about rolling it out to 100,000 devices that are running in a store, right? At the same time, I think we're seeing an increasing, I'll call it fragmentation of the cloud estate, right? It used to be we thought in terms of, strongly centralized private data centers that then moved to being strongly centralized cloud providers. And I think what we've now seen is an emergence of multiple different things sort of that are near cloud, right? So you have sort of CDNs that have enhanced compute capability. That lets me move things and workload closer to my users, which if I'm doing things like multiplayer gaming, matters for latency, matters for voice chat, matters for sort of that being able to do real-time communication. So that might augment what I'm putting into my core data centers by trying to get closer to my users. At the same time, we've seen the regulatory landscape evolve quite a bit last few years, right? So we're seeing much more regulatory concern around sovereignty, right? And data being able to stay within your country or within sort of a geographic block. And so I think that's driving different behavior. Now you see much more regional clouds, right? You might be a country-specific cloud or a telco-specific cloud. And now our compute footprint spans all of this, right? So what we're seeing from customers is their challenge has gone from, hey, I had a handful of private data centers to I have those, plus I have my public clouds, plus I have my sovereign clouds, plus I have my retail stores, plus I have my devices. So all of this for us is massively increasing the complexity of infrastructure on one hand. But I also think that the only answer as you have that level of fragmentation is that the tools require more automation, right? Yeah, you could have gotten away with more manual process when you had 2 data centers. It's a lot harder when you have 2,000, right, or 100,000, right? That just requires a different level of automation. You're not going to point and click in a console with 100,000 endpoints, right? At the same time, I think it puts more pressure on a consistency of approach, right? It was one thing if I had one process, maybe another thing if I had 2 processes. It becomes very difficult if I have to have 10 different processes, right? So to us, as we think about Edge, what's exciting about it is it's enabling entirely new engagement models, right? It's enabling us to work with our customers in store and be able to do things real time. It's enabling real time telecom and video gaming. But it brings a certain complexity at the infrastructure side that we're looking to solve as well. Then thinking about security, right? I think this is a huge evolution. In fact, I think in some sense maybe the most complex evolution as we go to cloud. I think the traditional model for many, many years was all called a perimeter model. We sort of secured the 4 walls of our data center. We brought traffic in and out of the front door. And we sort of treated the inside as trusted, safe, confidential, et cetera. I think as we're getting this sort of explosion of infrastructure, right, that perimeter is gone, right? It's already complicated if I have multiple cloud regions, add 2,000 stores into the mix, right? And now you can start to see what does it mean when we start to talk about a network perimeter, right? So I think this is the reality that we now live in, is that it's hard to define what the perimeter even is. And in many ways, I actually think this is a good thing, right? The perimeter model always had its flaws. It made assumptions that the network was confidential, that it was secure, that you don't have a malicious insider, that you never have a 0-day, that you never misconfigured a firewall. There was a bunch of ifs and ands and buts that went into that. And as we know, and we've seen sort of breach over breach, attack after attack, all of those assumptions were bad assumptions, right? So to us, what this starts with, the sort of zero trust starts by saying, I don't trust my network, I assume it's been compromised. Attacker is on network, there is a 0-day, whatever happened, I don't trust my network. Now what? How do I build assuming that my network is compromised, right? And in many ways, this is the way we've treated the public internet for many years, right? Like you don't trust the public internet, you assume it's adversarial. How do we bring that same assumption into the data center, right? Now, I think what makes this hard is it's a mindset shift, right? It's a totally different paradigm than what we've used for the last 20, 30 years when we talk about data centers. And so all of a sudden, this puts a lot of pressure on things like, hey, maybe I shouldn't check in my secrets in plain text into GitHub. Okay, yeah, probably a bad idea, right? I should actually do things like secret management. I have to scan for plain text secrets. I should encrypt data at rest in my databases. I should encrypt them in transit between different services when I publish to Kafka, when it's going between these things. So all of that is a bit of a mindset shift, both from security perspective, from a networking perspective, from a development team perspective, and I think it's going to take time. I think maybe the conclusion for us as we think about this is, let's accept in many ways that the perimeter model is dead, and it's only going to get harder to keep it alive as we sort of go to these edge environments. And that zero trust is a bit of a transformational approach, right? It's a different mindset, it's a different philosophy, it's a different set of tools. But at the end of the day, it's going to make us more secure and keep our customer data secure because we're not assuming the trust of our networks. So speaking of networks, I think this is another area of tremendous complexity and challenge, right? When we think about traditional networks, it was very much a hardware-driven approach. You had routers and firewalls and switches and load balancers. And so great, now as we're going cloud, a lot of those functions are now still exist, but they're being delivered not as hardware, but as software or virtual services. At the same time, we've seen a fragmentation of approach. It used to be very much I had a hardware device in a physical data center. Now I have multiple different approaches. I have software-defined networks. I have software-defined firewalls. I have API gateways. I have service mesh. I have enterprise service bus. So all of these different things, in practice, what we see is it's not one or the other, it's and. It's and. And so I think what we've seen is this explosion of complexity within the network, right? Particularly when you overlay this now over a multi-cloud, a fractured compute environment with edge, and you have these different philosophies all interacting. What this translates to, this complexity, is ultimately making it hard for our developer teams to deliver what they want, right? It used to be great. I deploy my app. There's a firewall rule that gets updated. I can talk to my database. Now I have to understand 15 different levels of network control, right? So I think this makes it a lot harder for our developers to debug when things go wrong. It makes it a lot harder to ensure things are actually secure because we have to reason about 4, 5, 6 different layers of control and how they interact with each other. And I think as an industry, we haven't reached a consensus on how to best tackle this, right? But I think the conclusion feels relatively clear to me that this doesn't seem sustainable. It seems hard to keep adding more and more and then expecting us to be able to resolve the fact that these are many different overlapping different approaches. So I think the kind of conclusion for us as we look at this and say this highly fragmented landscape is bringing a lot of complexity with it. But any successful approach to this has to deal with getting to a bit more standardization, getting to a bit more consistency, and automating it for developers so that we don't have to reason about, okay, did I update my network access control and my firewall and my service mesh and my API gateway? Because that's just creating a bunch of friction in delivering the applications. The next one is the internal developer platform, right? And you sort of heard this from Evan at Home Depot. You sort of heard this from George at Unity. You heard this from us as we talk about Waypoint. And I think this goes back to the exact same set of challenge, which is ultimately we want to enable those thousands of developers to be successful with their service, their application, what they're delivering. We don't want them to have to be experts at our software-defined network and Terraform and our compute orchestration and. So as we think about this, I think it goes back to those golden patterns, those golden workflows, exactly kind of what George mentioned, which is, hey, can we automate a bunch of the networking stuff through an opinionated provider? Can I package that as part of a set of Terraform modules so that my developers come in and they can just consume that pattern, the golden pattern, without having to know exactly how my network and IP blocks and all of that stuff is managed? That's a detail to them. They don't really care, right? And what we heard from Evan is they're now in the third generation of thinking about what does this platform look like. Certainly for us, I think it's the same pattern we've observed, which is the complexity of all of this tool sprawl is creating friction and creating barriers to entry. So for us, we think about it as how do we allow the developers to focus on what they care about? How do we allow the platform teams to have those controls? As Evan said, the SRE teams, the platform teams, they want all the knobs. They want all the controls. They need to know how these platforms work because they're operating them and they're responsible for them. So our view is that that needs to be the critical balance. We need to enable the platform teams and ops teams to have their controls, configure it, and manage it the way they want, but simplify it for developers to consume the set of patterns and workflows that enable them to deliver the app. Lastly is sort of what's the impact of infrastructure management with AI, right? Obviously, top of mind for all of us. You heard Unity talk about how their Muse product is coming in to help developers be more productive by sort of helping them understand the Unity framework better. You heard from Home Depot leveraging some of these techniques as well to improve the business efficiency. I think to me that's the impact AI is going to have even in the infrastructure management space. When we think about the complexity involved, it's how do we help the AI, use the AI tooling to help better generate some of this stuff and say, hey, great, looks like you're trying to build a Java app on AWS. Here's the set of modules and patterns we recommend. Help the developer in that sense. At the same time, when we think about the complexity of these environments, how do we help do the right synthesis, right? I don't want to have to look through a bunch of stuff. I'd rather it surface and say, hey, you have these 50 applications that are running on a vulnerable image. Those might be where you want to go prioritize. So to me, it sits on both sides of the spectrum. It's helping synthesize and generate configuration and lower the bar, right? And on the other side, it's helping us sort of find the needles in the haystack as we're operating these large, complex infrastructures, right? And I think that's where there's an opportunity to bring both productivity to the operations teams, the platform teams, as well as to the end developer teams who are leveraging the technology, right? And so for us, as we think about this, we reflect a little bit on the Tao of HashiCorp. We published the Tao almost 10 years ago. And this was our core philosophy as we thought about building tools for infrastructure management. And in many ways, what's interesting to me is 10 years in, I'm not sure I would change any of it, right? And as we think about sort of the next 10 years, again, I think for us, a lot of this rings true. In fact, I think we feel, in some sense, more confident than ever in some things like workflows over technologies. We've seen a tremendous evolution of the cloud technology landscape over the last 10 years. But what we haven't seen a tremendous evolution of is the workflows, right? And I think that's where we continue to focus in terms of how do we make those simple, how do we make those flexible so that we can evolve to solve different technology challenges, to solve different environments. And so for us, we continue to focus on how do we incorporate these trainings, how do we sort of solve these in the next generation of our product thinking. And I think the CTO of HashiCorp is going to continue to guide us on that. So thank you so much. That's everything I have today for the opening keynote. If you have had not enough HashiConf, I'm super excited to announce HashiConf 24 is already available to save the date. So I'm excited for this one. This is going to be our first time in Boston. Beautiful city. It's going to be a great time of year. We're going to get all the nice crisp foliage change. And it's a beautiful hotel right in the seaport. So very excited to have you all joining us for that. We are doing for the first 50 registrants, there will be a 2-night stay that we will give to a few of the lucky folks who register early. So please go ahead and sign up, and we are looking forward to having you there next year. And with that, I will hand it back to our MCs. Have a great day, too. We have a lot of great content lined up. Thank you so much.